right, welcome to Road to Success, a show where we highlight individuals and the steps that they took on their road to success. I'm so excited to be joined today with Melanie McGovern, the International Association of Better Business Bureaus, and you are the Director of Public Relations for them, correct?
Correct. Thank you.
Tell me a little bit about this role and what you do.
So for the IABBB, we are the parent organization to the 90 BBBs in North America. So my role is to work with all of the BBBs to make sure that we have consistent messaging across all of our offices. I also serve as national spokesperson. So any national media requests that we get comes through my office, and I also serve as spokesperson. So I get to do the interviews and work with the national journalists to, not only pitch stories, but to, develop relationships with them so that, whenever we have something we want to talk about for BBB, we can just call them like we did, you and I did back in the day and say, hey, I've got this great story for you. So a lot of relationship building is like the biggest part of my job, I would say.
To be on this national stage didn't happen overnight. Tell me a little bit about your journey to joining the BBB family.
Well, I started as a journalist. I worked at radio stations in the Midwest, eventually landing back in Buffalo about 25 years ago now. Worked at my local hometown AM news radio station. It was amazing. I loved it. But then it was, time to move on. And, I worked in government for a while. But just I got bit by the nonprofit bug, and I just loved the mission of nonprofits. And when I was looking for another job, I saw this position open at the BBB in Buffalo, and I'm like, oh yeah, the Better Business Bureau. So I started there as an assistant 12 years ago now, and just kind of worked my way up through the system at the local BBB. We had 9 markets across upstate New York. So Albany was one of them. So I worked with all of you guys in media. We had partners here. We still have partners in Albany, the chambers, the business council. So just being a part of that, even though I didn't live in each town, making yourself a part of the town by building the relationships was so important to the upstate New York BBB. And they still have those wonderful relationships today.
What is your education background that really prepared you for the role that you have today?
I think the biggest thing for, anybody who's in public relations, media, comms is that journalism background. And being a working journalist for so long, I went to the State University of Fredonia, had a wonderful time there, but they have such a great broadcast communications program. Interned in Buffalo, which was another really great, opportunity because Buffalo at the time was a top 50 market. It was not a place where you started. It was a place you aspired to go. So being able to learn from people in Buffalo, to work at, one of the top radio stations when I was in college. But, anytime, and you know this so well, Cassie, every story you're assigned, you need to be a subject matter expert by 6 o'clock. You need to know every in and out of that story. So that is just something that as a journalist, it's such an incredible skill to have, and it translates so nicely into other careers. Not only like working in politics and government, but working for a nonprofit and just really getting into the mission and being able to speak about that mission so clearly and with so much passion. All of that comes from journalism.
And so at what point did this opportunity become available? Did they give you a call, and why did you feel like it was the right fit to make that jump?
It was one of those things. And I just have nothing but wonderful things to say about the Buffalo BBB. Like, it's just such a great organization. But I knew I wasn't going to be anything more there because the leadership is so incredible. Nobody was going anywhere. And when this position at the association popped up, being a part of it, like a group, an association, we all like work at different BBBs, but at the same mission. My friends in the system were like, you should apply. You're so good at your job. We love taking advice from you. You just have that natural leadership ability. You should apply. So I, did some soul searching and said, I think I'm going to go for it, and ended up getting the job. And it's just been an incredible experience to be able to mentor new people in the system coming in, getting them acclimated to BBB, who we are and what we do. And, just to be able to say, hey, I've been on Good Morning America, I've been on the Today Show, things like that. It's really cool just to get that message out. So it was really hard. I think I literally burst into tears when I told the CEO of our BBB that I was leaving.
Mm.
But he was proud that his person was the person who was chosen. So, it was kind of cool in that, like, we still all work together to this day. So it's been really awesome to have that relationship.
I also felt a sense of pride. I remember, one day in the newsroom looking up and it was Good Morning America and I saw your face and I was so excited. I was like that like you felt like you were one of our own, representing upstate New York, and to see you on Good Morning America was so exciting. That's part of your role now as a national spokesperson. Was that a little bit tricky for you to get the, maybe nerves under wraps to be able to do something like that? I probably not, just because you're such a great communicator, but what was that like for you to add that to your role of responsibilities?
It was the first couple of times it was very daunting because you're not dealing with the reporter, you're dealing with a producer who wants a soundbite in some cases, but in other cases, as you're having the conversation, they're like, "Oh, this is a whole different story. We can get two stories out of this." And it was nerve-wracking because they would stop you and say, "Nope, you looked away or you blinked." And I'm like, "But I'm a person." So they want things a certain way, which I get.
Mhm.
Um, but it doesn't take away from the story. It just enhances it to get the story the way they want it. So that was a little daunting at first, but the more you get to know the people that you're interviewing with and their style of questioning versus the way you answer. And like one of the things I do media training is listen, pause, then answer the question. Although I laugh that one of the greatest things I ever learned was from Vicky Wynn from the Today Show. She's like, you need to stop saying again. You always say again, like people know what you're talking about. And that just always stuck in my mind. Anytime I'm doing an interview, to not to assume that the audience knows what I'm talking about, but
Right.
that they are learning all of this information for the first time. So I'm very grateful to her for that.
That's great advice. It's so funny, to get something from an outsider's perspective, and then you're like, oh, I do that.
Yep.
I think I've experienced that too now that I'm anchoring on a full-time basis. My co-anchor has been great with education. She's like, you tend to say this, and that tends to be your crutch. And I was like, I watched it back, and I was like, you're right, I do. Thank you.
And we all watch ourselves and
Mhm.
see how, I notice sometimes I up talk and I'm trying to not do that. But then I'm like, it seems forced. So, I mean, a lot of it is your performance, not necessarily what you're saying, but it's more of your performance too, because if you want people to be able to pay attention and understand what you're trying to say in your news story, you have to be a little performative in the way that you present that information so that you can get that soundbite and it works in the story.
Now, I know in the communications field, each day is so different, just like a day as a journalist, every single day is different. But if you could walk me through kind of what a day in your life looks like on the job, I think that could be helpful for some of our viewers.
Yeah, it starts with just monitoring the media, seeing what's going on in the news. How can BBB information be helpful to any national news story? That's a big part of it. Checking emails, making sure that everybody in the system has what they need. They may have a difficult story, or they might get a request that they're like, "Oh, is this something we can talk about?" So they lean on me for that, which is exactly what I want them to do. And then I'll start getting requests from media, and they could run the gamut of, what information do you have on this company? I'm like, well, everything is in the business profile, which is on our website. They can read business profiles, they can see the complaints, they can see the reviews. Sometimes it's, hey, I'm working on a story about gift card scams. Can you find me a scam survivor to talk to? So that's working with our data team here to go into our scam tracker tool to see who consented to media and then doing the outreach. So a lot of my day is spent on the phone, with media, pitching media, or speaking with real people who had terrible experiences with scams and trying to convince them this is a good thing if you go on television to talk about it, because it makes such an impact. Because people will see the story and they'll think, oh my God, that almost happened to me. Or they'll run into a situation and think, didn't I see that on the news? I think that's a scam. So just working with people to, remind them that this is bigger than them, that they're really helping people is a big part of my day as well, is just, working with just regular people who took the time to say, I'm going to sit down at my computer and write up a scam tracker report to let the others in the world know, hey, this is going on.
When you look at scams, every conversation we had is they get a little bit more complex and the scammers get a little bit smarter and they're always finding ways to trick people. And the sad part is, in the wake of any kind of natural disaster and people are reaching out and wanting to give back, scammers take advantage of people's emotions and vulnerabilities during that time. But when you also think about it being December, the holiday shopping, that also seems to be one of those times that people tend to be a little bit more on alert for scams. Is this kind of your busiest time of year when you're thinking of the Better Business Bureau?
It absolutely is the busiest time of the year for our PR people in the system. We started working in September on holiday content and making sure all of our content was up to date, making sure that anything that starts trending in Scam Tracker that we can get a handle on it before it becomes a big problem. We're seeing more than just your typical holiday scams. We're seeing a really big increase in employment scams again because people are looking for jobs, because there's so many layoffs that are going on and people still want remote jobs. So those are things that we keep an eye on, especially in the beginning of the year as well. But definitely online shopping scams right now, very big. Just people really need to take that second to investigate any ad that comes their way to make sure it's a real company or that the company has a good reputation before they buy. So yeah, this is the busiest time of year. All my friends are like, "Oh, don't you take the last 2 weeks of the year off?" I'm like, "Oh no, 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 no." We are always like, I will get that call on December 27th about, can we talk about returns? And then the week before the first of the year, can we talk about gym contracts? So there's always, the news for BBB is very similar probably to a newsroom where, you've got your editorial calendar and you know what's coming up. So we're the same way. We're ready for you guys. Whenever, whenever you decide to make that call, we are ready.
As a journalist, you mentioned same time of year, same kind of events pop up. And sometimes it feels like it can just feel like Groundhog's Day doing everything over and over again. But I think if you really love what you're doing and you're excited, you can find different ways to tackle it. There's always something new about it. For you, does it ever get monotonous doing kind of those same kind of like storylines each year and still tackling it?
I think the interesting thing is that no, because there's always a new angle or twist on a scam. This year, we partnered with the National Cybersecurity Alliance to do more education around online shopping. So it just seems like it gets more sophisticated. So we need to stay on top of it. Even though we feel like we're being repetitive, there is a whole new audience who has not seen this yet. And we have to remember that. So it's taking the content, seeing what, we literally 2 years ago had to go through and scrub the pandemic from all of our content and see if it still was relevant. So we're always in our content, making sure that if somebody is searching for information and that BBB article pops up, it is 100% up to date. But, adding any new twists, like the biggest thing, going back to the employment scams, is that actual employment agencies are being spoofed to the point where people are like, "Oh, I've heard of them. Maybe this is real." So just making sure we're staying on top of, the same old scam, but now instead of a phone call, it's a text message, or instead of an email, it's a text message. So, and we know people answer text messages in like, what is it, like a minute within receiving it. And then there's people walking around with 37,000 emails in their inbox. So they're just getting smarter. So we just have to stay on top of it and make sure everybody knows, what to look for.
Do you travel a lot for your current role?
Just a little bit. It's great because we have all of these great technologies to do this. I mean, some stations will have me go to the stations in Buffalo and have them shoot actual footage and then send it back to the national reporters. So that's fun. I've had reporters come here to Buffalo to see me, so that's pretty cool. But I think with the technology just makes this job that much easier and easier for us to reach a bigger audience because we have these great programs that allow us to be, doing things like this.
Different markers that people will use to kind of find success in their careers or their lives and their different pathways. Has there been a moment in your career that you've really had to take a step back and be like, wow, I'm proud of myself. Like, look what I've done.
Yeah, I think, completing, so I did a leadership class, and I would encourage anybody, if you have an opportunity to do a leadership class, to take that opportunity. And you just, you take that with a 50,000 foot view of your career, and you're like, wow, I've really done a lot of things. And in the middle of that leadership class is when I switched into this role. And I think it was the first time somebody took a screenshot and posted it on my Facebook wall of all places, like, oh my God, you're on the Today Show. Oh my God, you're on Good Morning America. I'm like, people are seeing this stuff. It's resonating. They realize it's me, and that anything that we can do to help or that people recognize, it's just that's that moment where you're like, this is impactful. Like we're really making an impact here on people's lives. So it's
And
pretty cool.
is that the driver for you? I always like to ask people, when you wake up in the morning, I've had jobs where you just dread to come in. Luckily, I haven't had many of those. I feel lucky to wake up and be excited. But what gets you out of bed? What makes you excited to come in every day?
I think just knowing that if there's one person who saw our news story, read our content, engaged with our social media, and thought, "Oh, that's a good tip," or went over to our website and worked with an accredited business and had a wonderful experience. Just knowing that is the stuff that never gets reported, but in the back of your mind, you know that there are people who are very happy with what you do.
Mhm.
That's kind of what gets me out of bed in the morning is like, because sometimes you'll just open social and you'll see somebody complaining about a bad contract or they can't get out of something or that the contractor screwed up their house. And I'm like, what about the contractor did a great job? Or, oh, I'm so pleased with this. No, people tend to focus on negative. So I think what gets me out of bed is hoping that someday it's going to flip and they're only going to talk about the positive. I
Now,
have
mhm.
we get, I'll get reporters who's like, hey, can we talk about tax scams? I'm like, how about let's talk about how to hire a tax preparer you can trust? Maybe just like flipping it a little bit, but unfortunately, it's that scam story that people remember and hopefully helps them to make the right decision.
That's great, especially, we get those people who email in about, the bad contractor and, help get this person behind bars and things like that. But what could help more people instead of focusing on that one story of that one bad person is to educate people with the tools that they need to be able to properly navigate hiring a good contractor in the future so that maybe you can have a little bit more of a positive impact that way.
Exactly. And that's kind of the content we're going to be leaning into in 2026 is a lot more consumer education. But if there's a big scam going on, we will definitely be talking about that too.
Wonderful. And if you could go back and talk to a younger Melanie when she was getting ready for her career, and I'm sure newsroom days, especially when you're in the beginning, are not easy when you have to be doing a lot. What would you like to tell her?
It's going to get better. Learn to do a lot more with a lot less and just keep pushing forward. And it's, if you're not happy with your situation, it's okay to change it. My first job, I loved it, but I knew I wasn't going anywhere. So I lived in Peoria, Illinois. It was the late 90s. I was driving back to Buffalo. I had a bunch of resume cassettes with me, stopped at radio stations along the way, and ended up getting hired by a radio station in Columbus, just based on going for what I wanted. And I think a lot of us are a little timid sometimes, like we like our safety. But if there's something you want to do, or there's something that, you think you can do, just try it. Just do it. Like I did never in a million years when I got this job in 2014
Mhm.
as an assistant, thought I would be the director of PR for the whole organization. Like never. But you just got to go for it sometimes and see what happens. And if you fail, then you learn a lesson. But if you're successful, you continue to grow. So it's just something that I've always done. I've always just tried to really focus on things and go for what I want.
That's one thing I really appreciate about your story and just, hearing about it is it seems like you really put yourself out there a lot and you started it at throughout different ages of your life. And you think about when you were at the Better Business Bureau of Upstate New York for 8.5 years, you loved the people you worked with. It was there, you were living there. It's so easy to say, well, this is where I'm going to be, but you still took that time and you took a chance on yourself and you put yourself out there and look at you now, you're
Yeah.
not scared. And I admire that about you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's intimidating picking up the phone and calling Good Morning America, but if you've got a great story and you've got the confidence to tell it, do it.
Well, I think you're the right person for the job.
Thank you.
Melanie, that was a great conversation. Is there anything else that you would like to share with us while you have the floor?
No, I think we covered everything, but I think this is a really great idea to just get people like even just get them excited about whatever they're doing in themselves. I mean, I'm just having like parallel comparisons, not every job is like being on TV, but every job still is so important and impacts people's lives.
And I always love to ask about the motivation for what gets you out of bed or that, life-changing advice that you received throughout your career, because I think that those are tangible things that people can take out of the conversation that they can apply to their own situation. Like maybe they'll be like, huh, maybe I should put myself out there, or I don't feel that way when I wake up in the morning. Maybe I need to change something. So I think while each conversation is very unique, I think that there's always little parts that people hopefully can take away from it.
Yeah, and there's things like you can do in your personal life. Like I started a wellness journey like 5 years ago,
Mhm.
and now I'm a 7 a.m. gym person. I can't turn it off, and
Wow.
that whole thing. And like you're training for other things, and it helps so much with like your cognitive development, and it keeps you sharp. So just doing things in your personal life too to improve your professional life are so important.
They're interconnected, absolutely.
Yeah,
Well, Melanie, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. I really appreciate it.
thank you. This is great.
It was so great.